Okay, so for today's reading, I'm going to read the preface actually from Alan Watts' Nature, Man and Woman. It's a new book for me. I briefly opened it up to the preface before my walk and was kind of blown away. And I was like, I want to go for my walk and then I'm gonna read this and process it. So this is the preface. As I look around my library, I'm often strangely troubled by the way in which my books fit so snugly into categories. Most of my books have to do with philosophy, psychology, and religion, and they represent points of view from every great culture of the world. Yet with an absolutely oppressive monotony, they fit themselves into the stale dualities of philosophical and theological argument, varied from time to time with sensible and uninspiring compromises. Volume after volume is so easily identified as supernaturalist or naturalist, vitalist or mechanist, metaphysical or positivist, spiritualist or materialist. And the compromise volumes are usually so watered down as to be compilations of platitudes and sentimentalities. Underlying all of these dualities, there seems to be a basic division of opinion about these two great poles of human thought, spirit and nature. Some people stand plainly for one and against the other. Some stand mainly for one, but give the other a subordinate role. Others attempt to bring the two together, though human thinking moves in such firm ruts that it usually turns out that they have settled inadvertently for one or the other. It is doubtless foolhardy for any philosopher to claim that he has broken loose from these ruts and at the same time said anything meaningful. Discussion is so much a matter of juggling with categories that to start breaking up the categories is usually to break up the discussion. But this is not just a matter of categories, logic, and philosophical argument. The opposition of spirit and nature is also a matter of life and feeling. Ever since I began to study these matters, I've been puzzled by the way in which exponents of the life of the spirit do not seem to be at home in nature and in their bodies. For even when they do not identify the natural with the evil, they damn it with faint praise. So often I've sympathized with bold pagan rebellion against this bodiless spirituality, and yet never joined with it, because the final word of this gather ye rosebuds while ye may philosophy is always despair, or some fatuous utopianism, which, because it is only a matter of time, comes to the same thing. For the congenitally sick, the victims of accident, the impoverished, and the dying, this philosophy has no message. But is the alternative to joy in the body, delight in the discarnate spirit? I've been realizing more and more that partisans to opposed philosophies share the same premises, which are usually unconscious. Furthermore, these premises are transmitted by such social institutions as the structure of language and the learning of roles, influencing us in ways of which we are hardly aware. Thus, the conventional saint and the conventional sinner, the ascetic and the sensualist, the metaphysician and the materialist may have so much in common that their opposition is quite trivial. Like alternating heat and cold, they may be symptoms of the same fever. This catches my attention because for so long, I felt that way like about politics. I grew up really right wing, then I went really left wing, and frankly, I found that they were the same. I found, other than like some basics about their opinions, their energy, like everything about them was the same. Then I got into one religion or another, or atheism, and was searching for something and kept running into this. I'm realizing this is the first time I've heard someone speak of it, that like, it's all really monotonous. Like it's the same BS. No one's really answering the questions that we should be asking. They're just sort of giving an easy response, a lot of times in opposition to what someone else is saying. So maybe if I've grown up Christian and I'm anti-Christian, then I can go to atheism and it can give me some solutions to that. But it's not really still answering the same questions, and has its own set of questions that are really odd that the other one has answers for. So, like, for example, with atheism, I was like, there's no religion, even if people don't want to call it that, it is, because I'm like, there's no faith or religion that has required more faith of me and offered less in return. And to say this is all an accident requires a lot of faith. It's not logical at all when you look around. But they think they can get out of the faith question because they're not willing to look at the fact that it still requires faith. But if you go over to Christianity, many of those things don't make sense. And even Buddhism, you go all around and you're like, these all have good pieces. The divine message, I think, can come through a lot of different things, but they're still kind of missing the point. And anyone who is really intensely, or what we would call now extremist in any of those faiths or ideas, is the same energy as the ones in the opposing faith they hate so much. If you were to go hang around with them, you're like, it's like hanging out with the same people. They just believe something slightly different savior, different explanation for the start of the world, whatever it is, but you're really generating the same angsty, not satisfied, not happy energy. So you're not selling me on what you believe, because if you had the answers, you'd be at peace. All right, that's my rant on that. Back to Watsi. Unconscious premises of this kind come to light when we try to understand cultures very far removed from our own. They too have their hidden assumptions, but when we compare these cultures with our own, the basic differences must at last become obvious. This is peculiarly true of the cultures of the Far East, because they are high civilizations which arose in isolation from the West, developing patterns of thought and language startlingly different from those of the Indo-European strain. And that's why they're very helpful as contrasts, I think, to have both. Thus, the value of the study of Chinese language and thought is not simply that we ought to be able to communicate with the Chinese people, important as this is. It is rather that Chinese studies tell us so much about ourselves for the very reason that all the advanced cultures of the world, this is the most unlike our own in its ways of thinking. And I get that, and I love that about it too, because it gives you a new way to think about language and people. And thus it was always such a delight to me that Chinese philosophy would never quite fit into the ruts of Western and even Indian thought. And this was preeminently true of the problem of spirit and nature. For there were no categories of Chinese thought corresponding to spirit and nature as we understand them. And I think that's why I'm so drawn to Taoism, which I think he was too, because it had a whole new way. I think Taoism is one of the only sort of religions, even though it's not that, or ways of thought. It's almost like a non-religion, but that has an actual concept of God that I think is workable. And it would go in with Abraham. It's really a force, the thing that makes the leaves grow, and it has, and the grasses grow and the sun come up, and all of those things feeds the birds. Like, it's something kind of power, and Abraham would call it's the power that creates worlds that our focusing mechanism directs. But Taoism also acknowledges that when we focus on a problem, it gets worse. It has lines like, the more you hang laws, the more people you have sort of to arrest, like that. The more they're broken is the idea. The more government and ruling you have, the more crazy people get. It has this understanding of the relationship a bit between thought and what shows up. I don't know if that's what he's getting at, but that's what it made me think of. Here was a culture in which the conflict between spirit and nature hardly existed, a culture where the most naturalistic painting and poetry were precisely the most spiritual of its art forms. Interesting. I've never heard it put this way, that the Chinese had a balance between spirit and nature. This book is not, however, a formal account of the Chinese philosophy of nature. I have discussed this at length in my previous book, The Way of Zen. Perhaps I should order that. And it has been marvelously illuminated by Joseph Needham in his Science and Civilization in China. My object here is not to expound and compare philosophical systems. It is to reflect upon a great human problem in the light of the Chinese view of nature, especially as it was expressed by Lao Tzu and Chuang Tzu. So it is talking about Taoism. That's what this book is. or reflect upon the great human problem in light of Taoism. The urgency of the problem of man's relation to nature and the general intent of this book are, I think, sufficiently discussed in the introduction which follows. Here I've also explained why the problem of man's relation to nature raises the problem of man's relation to woman, a matter about which the spiritually minded members of our own culture have been significantly squeamish. Because this book is one in which I am frankly thinking out loud, I would like to repeat some remarks from the preface to my supreme identity. I am not one who believes that it is any necessary virtue in the philosopher to spend his life defending a consistent position. It is surely a kind of spiritual pride to refrain from thinking out loud, and to be unwilling to let a thesis appear in print until you are prepared to champion it to the death. Philosophy, like science, is a social function, for a man cannot think rightly alone, and the philosopher must publish his thought as much to learn from criticism as to contribute to the sum of wisdom. If then I sometimes make statements in an authoritative and dogmatic matter, it is for the sake of clarity rather than from the desire to pose as an oracle. It's really interesting. There is the prevalent belief in the West that intellectual and philosophical pursuits are unessential ornaments of culture of far less value than active and technological accomplishments. Intellectual and philosophical pursuits are far less value than active and technological accomplishments. We still carry that, don't we? This attitude is in great danger of being confused with the Eastern view that real knowledge is nonverbal and beyond the reach of concepts. But our actions are almost invariably directed by a philosophy of ends and values, and to the extent that this is unconscious, it is liable to be bad philosophy with disastrous and active consequences. The so-called non-intellectuality of the East lies as far above thought as mere activism lies below it. Such knowledge cannot be reached by making one's concepts unconscious under the impression that one is sacrificing the intellect. Distorting premises can be abandoned only by those who go down to the roots of their thinking and find out what they are. Distorting premises can be abandoned by those who go down to the roots of their thinking and find out what they are. I feel like this speaks to me because a lot of times I don't want to share or talk about the thoughts or insights that I'm having until they're all hammered out, and I'm still hammering them out, and that's one reason I'm going to a lot of thought places that already have some hammer out, and I like going to a lot of different ones. But this is telling me that it's okay to share in process because we do this together, and the more people that join me in it, the further we get together. Maybe you'll ask questions and the answers can come to me and through me. Maybe they already are, because I'm really getting deep into that our mind creates reality and our thinking is literally creating the world around us. And I would like to create a new world, to be blunt. Certainly just if it's just abundance and thriving in my own life, awesome. Or being happier, feeling better, feeling like a bigger contribution and service to the world, and feeling like I'm thriving in every way. And I've come so far from not thriving to really thriving by society's standards. But, you know, I'm the type that's just like, okay, I got here. Now what's next? I want to go what's next. I think that's human nature. I think we're all that way. But sometimes we're getting comfortable with settling. But now I think in the West, a lot of us aren't. A lot of us want to see or experience a different world. This is an age of leisure and pleasure. We have so much. Why are we so sick and unhappy and miserable when we have so much? It doesn't make logical sense. It's like the more healthcare and medical care we have, the worse off we are. The more pills we have, the more diseases we have. And so maybe we're starting to make a connection between those in a new way that's causing an asking. But for me, I am on a journey here. And I feel like I'm onto something, and I guess it brings me hope. I don't have to hammer it out. I feel exactly the same as him, that I've exhausted a lot of things that were out there and just didn't find it satisfying. So now I've stepped into a bunch of other things, and I crashed and burned my life a long time ago, and then I worked hard to get it back, and then I did the whole professional game and was the badass professional successful woman, got to 6 figures and an expert in my field, and found it all extremely unfulfilling and very disheartening because the level of fraud and the lack of ethics was just astounding to me. I really would have been able to stay had it not been so bad, or the amount I had to work. It just becomes obsessive, and constantly traveling, you don't really get to have a life. So then I developed a personal life that was and discovered it was all really a house of cards. I mean, it looked great on Facebook and, gives you a sense of security. But in order to keep those things, I had to pretend to be something I wasn't, and to pretend to be okay with things that I wasn't. And it didn't work for me. It's not how I do life. So I crashed the whole house of cards and kind of started over, not in a graceful way, but ended up randomly at my parents' ranch in Franktown, Colorado, suddenly around chickens and gardening, and it was totally different than traveling the world and going to China for business and being material factories and all of those things. And suddenly getting back to nature and earth was a little bit Taoist in that way, and observing and taking my career back a notch and getting back to basics with mental health and physical health and emotional health. And sort of going back through the recovery process, the 12-step process in there, which I had done earlier in life and sort of left behind. And there's something really magical in there, but that also wasn't fully satisfying, because you kind of have to stay broken a bit to stay in that, or constantly regurgitate a broken past. I don't think we're stuck there. So again, I've been through all these worlds: therapy and religion and 12-step and professionalism and super success and traveling and 5-star dinners and major cities all around the world, Hong Kong and Rome, Italy, and New York City and LA, and I've done all these fancy things, and I didn't find that any more satisfying. Actually, I found it, to be blunt, less satisfying than the less glamorous experiences, because the less glamorous ones felt so much more real. But the thing that was satisfying about the glamorous ones was obviously it's good food and, you have nice things, but it was like sharing it, for example, on social media, or the approval you get from others in society because you're doing it, or they're impressed. What do you do for work? Oh, I do this, and I blah, 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 blah. And like, ooh, and they put you on a strange pedestal. And if you're doing it on social media, people are like, ah, and you get a lot of likes and people look up to you, and you're like, you shouldn't be looking up to me, was always my thought. I'm missing something. I'm not happy. I don't have it figured out just because it looks great on paper. And then you develop other dysfunctions because your life isn't balanced and it's dysfunctional. And that's why you see so many people drinking so much, or smoking, or having so much sex, and there's so much porn online, or all of these sort of worldly pleasures. We have all this eating or obesity going on, and then people who aren't eating enough, and people who are overworking out and underworking out. And I mean, it's just all these out of balances breed other out of balances. And then we look up to it if you have money. But we played this game forever. I mean, how long can we look up to people just because they're rich? Not that being rich is bad. I want to have money in abundance, and I will. And I have plenty, by the way. But there's something in making that the priority. Like, I have so much more abundance now than when I was making like 6 figures, much more money, in the sense of I'm happy. I have an amazing partner and marriage and home that I love to be in. It might not cost as much, but or I rent rather than owning, but I don't care. I love my home, and it feels like home. That alone is so much abundance versus traveling all the time and living out of a suitcase so I can post cool pictures on Facebook, but feel like I have no place to really land where I really belong and where I'm really loved and feeling at peace. And we've got our abundance. Not that there's anything wrong with money, again, but we've kind of got it in the wrong category. And I'm discovering this as I'm going. I guess I'm saying what he's talking about here. Like, maybe it's okay, right, to what does he say? Thinking out loud. But he couldn't think out loud in this way. I mean, he did a lot of speaking, but I'm thinking out loud and I'm figuring it out loud. And I see how my thoughts at that time really created that reality, because I thought that was happiness and that's what I was supposed to have, and then I would feel happy. And I realized I wasn't happy, but got that cool looking stuff, and it only made me feel less happy. But now I'm doing the happiness, feeling good thing first. So I think when that stuff comes or is attracted, it will feel totally different. That's my theory. And that's one reason I'm starting this, because even though I've come a long way on the journey, something is off. The work I keep attracting is always unethical, no matter where I go. I went from being in factories in China and looking at audits in Bangladesh and India to working in the US and found just as many ethical concerns here, which kind of blew my mind. So it's me, I'm aware, like it's me attracting this. I want to change that. And I'm realizing if I'm a hero, then I always have to have somebody to save. If I think that things are always unethical, they're going to be unethical around me. And if I'm focusing on problems, I'm just going to see more problems. And there's a piece of me being at the vibration of worry that's attracting this stuff, things to worry about. And I don't want to live that way anymore. Like just now, my clippers for my dog are beeping. How random is that? Something to worry about. Because no matter what I do when I'm making these videos, there's some weird sound that occurs. It's resistance, right? So I think that's enough thinking out loud for me today. It's sort of combining some thought processes with our reading. And I think I'm going to keep reading from that. Well, we'll see. It's going to be different every day.